Good morning. I think we're still waiting on a couple legislators to make it here this morning, but Representative Poskin and I wanted to be as timely as we could because you all showed up. We showed up, so here we are. I'm Representative Linda Featherston. I represent House District 16, which you are sitting in right now. We're at the northern edge, and this district goes along Quivira down to 129th Street. So we have Blue Valley, Olathe, and Shawnee Mission schools all crossing this district. We have the community college and we have the KU Edwards campus. I like to say we're the smartest district in the whole state. Representative Poskin might fight me for that. This year, the legislature is going to reconvene on Monday at 2:00. That will be largely a ceremonial day. So, knock on wood, nothing too bonkers should happen that day. But by Wednesday in the education committee, the nonsense will start. So this year, my committees will remain the same. I'm going to be on local government, where I'm the ranking member. I'm on the water committee. I'm on the education committee. And I'm on the agriculture committee, where I am also the ranking member. So I'll hand off.
Well, good morning, everybody. Representative Mary-Lynn Poskins. I represent Kansas House District 20, and that is a little bit east of here. I've got my district is 95th to 135th Street, state line to Mission Road, and then it narrows a little bit, 103rd to 127th over to Metcalf. And so this will be my sixth year, third term in the legislature, and I do have committee changes this time. I have been on Veterans and Military since the first day I stepped into that building, and I am going to be relinquishing that and also financial institutions and pensions to move over to the Fed and State. So I will be serving on K-12 budget, which is the heart of the reason that I ran in the first place was to protect our public schools. I'll be on labor, commerce, and economic development, and then Fed and State. So I'm looking forward to your questions. As Representative Featherston said, this session starts on Monday, and it is going to be fast and furious. They expect to be out of that building by the second week of April. We've got budgets, we've got all kinds of legislation to look at. So once they did that last year, and I'm not a fan of that schedule. I think that we are not doing our best to serve Kansans when we don't have enough time to look at things very, very carefully, especially our budget. So I'll hand on over to Senator Holscher, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. My apologies for running a few minutes late. I have college kids getting ready to head back to school this morning, so our house is a little bit nutty once again. So again, thank you all for being here. Yes, the legislative session is upon us, and it's interesting. I spend a lot of time on the phones during the week making calls to people and telling constituents and others that I'm talking to that, I'm trying to get mentally prepared for what is to come. I don't know if there's a real good way to do that, honestly, after the past few sessions. The good news is, we are starting out with some good news as we go into this session. You all likely heard that redistricting sounds like it is dropped at this point in terms of it being a prospect moving forward. So that is great news for us. And yeah. And I will tell you, back in September, when we first started hearing the GOP talking about trying to do a special session for redistricting, I took actually some time away from the campaign to mobilize people across the state to make calls and email to legislators to push back and voice opposition for redistricting. And I have to hand it to the folks across the state who did that, because they called and emailed every day for over a month voicing opposition. And then to my almost, big surprise, on election night, a note was handed to me saying that the GOP was dropping their efforts. So again, very big victory. Thank you all for the parts, because I know some of you all were doing the calls and making those emails sending those emails across the state. And then just a couple days ago, it was in an article that it sounds like the GOP does not have the votes for redistricting. They've counted noses. So again, great job. So appreciative of all the work done by people across the state in those efforts. My committees for this year will stay the same, it sounds like. I've been on healthcare the entire time I've been in the legislature, starting in the House and then crossing over to the Senate. That is a very, very interesting committee, because lots of anti-vaxxers, lots of science deniers. So it's a lot of pushing back in that committee. I'm also on the Doge committee, which, if you're familiar with Doge on the federal level, that is what the state came up with to have a similar committee. While it is put out there that it's supposed to be to look for inefficiencies throughout government. And the reality is, what we see, it's the same as on the federal level. It's basically finding ways to get rid of employees in those very important agencies and services that the government provides. So that's more of what the emphasis has become. At that committee, I'm also on Ways and Means and then Utilities in the afternoon. So it is, every day is a very full day. I thank you all so much for trusting me to go fight for you, because that's pretty much what every session is, fighting to push back really bad stuff and then pull forward a few good things that we can get. So again, I thank you for the work that you're going to do, sending more emails and making phone calls, because we're going to need you. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. And I apologize for being late. I have a dog. She ate my kid's breakfast. It was this whole thing. Yeah, and these folks all know Olive. They know what she's like. So, yeah, she's notorious for counter surfing. So anyway, so I apologize for that. I'm Representative Stephanie Sawyer Clayton. I represent the area from Metcalf to State Line, 83rd to 103rd, unless you live east of Mission Road, and then it's 95th to Somerset. So just think Old Leawood, South Prairie Village, and East Central Overland Park, kind of like the Meadowbrook Ranch Mart area. So, and I will be starting my 14th legislative session serving you all. So very grateful to all of you for allowing me to do this work. I am still going to be on the same committees that I have been on. I'm the vice chair of our Rules Committee, which is interesting for you parliamentary procedure nerds. And it is one of the only committees that we have that is not live streamed. So whenever there's a challenge to any sort of potential rule violation on the House floor, we go back and we hide behind the big dais where everyone sits, and we get into these knockdown, drag-out fights. Honestly, I'd love it if someone just showed up with a GoPro and started putting that online, because it would be interesting to see. Although you guys would see me, if you think I'm angry normally, oh boy, it's, yeah. So, but I am also the ranking minority member on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee, as well as a member of the Federal and State Affairs Committee. Representative Poskin is a brand new member of that committee. Get ready. It's at 9 o'clock in the morning, and some days you'll be covering medicinal cannabis, although probably not this session. Some days you get alcohol laws. Some days you get just all kinds of stuff. It's usually where sin and salvation meet is sort of one of the nicknames for it. And then the tax committee, which bores a lot of people, but to me, I think that our tax policy most reflects where the legislature puts its morality. Because people often talk about how the budget is the most reflective. It's, where we put the tax dollars, where we appropriate the funds. But when we decide who pays for the things and who doesn't pay for the things, that's where you really start seeing where the rubber meets the road. So to me, the tax committee has been one that I have been fighting to get on ever since I was on the other side of the aisle. And then Representative Holscher, before she lost her mind and went to the Senate, she and I co-founded the Women's Caucus to help overturn the Brownback tax plan, which I guess they're going to try and implement in Missouri. Normally, I don't like to help Missouri, but in this case, I just want to say, girl, no, don't do it. But I don't know if they will listen. In any case, I really look forward to hearing all of your questions. Some of the things that I have on my radar as we are heading in this session are a couple of tweaks to some economic development incentive projects. I've been told that we will be making some tweaks to the STAR bonds in commerce. That is all I have been told. I think it's been kept deliberately vague. So I will find out when I go in and go to work there. And then again, solving property tax issues. So I'm hearing from a lot of constituents who are experiencing major sticker shock at the way that valuations have kind of skyrocketed. But a lot of this is due to the free market. It's amazing here and everyone wants to live here, but that also causes major cost issues for a lot of our constituents. And so we're looking at ways to sort of thread the needle by appeasing constituents without hurting local government. It is not as easy as you might think, but we are definitely hearing a lot. That replaced education is the number one issue that I hear about. So, but also I think a lot of it is because everyone wants to live in my district. So, and that's why we get that, again, the jumping valuations. So those are some of the main problems we're going to tackle. I don't think that Fed and state will be too controversial this session, and for that, I'm okay. Sometimes it's really tough to wake up to major controversy at 9 a.m. before I've even had my first cup of coffee. But I am really looking forward to serving you all. And the best part about coming to these forums is hearing your questions. I pride myself on my transparency. I live tweet all of my votes. Only about 60% of our votes are actually recorded. So we take all these votes in committee on the initial bill, and then on amendments, especially in my committee, Commerce Committee, sometimes the amendment can completely gut the bill and put something brand new in it, and it's a completely different deal. But a lot of those votes are not recorded, so you don't really know what anyone's doing. And so when I first started as a admittedly, much younger legislator with better skin and less haggard looking, but that's what serving does to you, I was always told, oh my God, don't tell everyone every single thing that you vote. That's ridiculous. You are just basically giving ammunition to your opponents. And I ignored them. And, still here, still doing it. If you would like to sign up for my newsletter, I write it myself every Friday afternoon or Friday morning when we're done. And that goes out. It's been pretty sporadic, but we haven't been doing a lot. So again, communication is key. Respect is key. Looking forward to hearing more from your questions. And thank you all so much for being here.
So our friend Bill has the microphone back there, and he'll help us out with your questions. So if you have something that you want to ask one of us, Bill is back there. Raise your hand, and he will come to you with the microphone.
Hi, my name's John, over by Johnson County Community College. I actually have a question for Senator Holscher here. So I'd like to first ask you a question, then submit a little bit of evidence, and then follow up with another question, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Alrighty. Do you believe in Project 2025 authored by Russell Lott?
Do I believe that it exists? Project.
Okay, sorry, let me rephrase. Do you believe it is in action right now in our federal government?
Okay. So the question is, do I believe that Project 2025, if it is in implementation?
Mhm.
It certainly appears that it is. If it's not Project 2025, it's something extremely similar because many of the actions, many of the areas of emphasis in Project 2025 are what we see federal policy seem to be implementing and working towards.
Okay, glad to hear that. So then I'd like to just submit a little bit of evidence. These were found on the ACLU website. Call for quote unquote expedited removal by ICE, a process reserved for deportations only near the border, using using military personnel and hardware to prevent crossings near the border, an absolute escalation of immigration enforcement. They even call for dismantling asylum. And then just the other day, you have Vice President J.D. Vance, quote, protected by absolute immunity, referring to the ICE officer shooting Renee Good. And then hours later, you have two more shot in Portland by ICE, federal agents. So, and then bystanders and Renee Good are being labeled as domestic terrorists by our federal government, Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, and Donald Trump. And there are increased levels of force that are quite frankly not proportional to protests. You have the shooting of Reverend David Black with chemical irritant in Chicago. Minneapolis canceling schools because ICE fired chemical irritants into a crowd of high schoolers. And then two more shot in Portland. and federal government's painting them out to be gang members, but I would like to remind you that everyone deserves a fair and just trial. So, with all that evidence being proposed to you, would you join Congresswoman in Oregon as a call out? Janelle Bynum is her name, by the way. Would you call a spade and say that ICE is state sponsored terrorism?
Well, let me back up because you had a couple different questions there. So, I mean, we do have an immigration, well, let me back up. So on the federal level, we've been trying to get something passed in terms of addressing immigration processes. And then what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? There actually was a pretty good bill, it sounded like, that was being pushed forward that didn't make it to the finish line. So, I mean, there are parts of our immigration system that are broken that need to be addressed. But let me make this very clear. I mean, every citizen out there is entitled to due process. And what we are seeing happening on our streets, that's not due process. We have people signing up to be ICE agents who likely haven't had appropriate training, who don't know how to de-escalate situations. And then unfortunately, we see very bad things happening on our streets. So, like I said, I'm absolutely concerned about the fact that, people now are feeling like, can I go to the store? Can I go to school? Can I make a simple trip to a neighbor's house because of what we're seeing happening? And, I will just go further and say that the way that Renee is being labeled, Renee Good, that's offensive in terms of the way the far right is attaching labels, not just miscommunicating, but putting pure misinformation out there about her and who she was. So, like I said, I'm offended by that in terms of the labels that are being addressed to her. You will see that I'm going to be bringing forward bills to address some of the situation that we are seeing, even here in Kansas, in some neighborhoods, in terms of requiring that or prohibiting that ICE can't go into schools or hospitals or churches. I brought that bill forward last year, hoping that there would be support for it. Unfortunately, a number of my peers signed on to the resolution saying that they would fully comply with Donald Trump's orders. That is not where we need to be in this and then in this moment. So like I said, I'm doing everything I can to push back against those actions because, again, every citizen is allowed due process, and that is not what we are seeing happening out there.
Senator Holscher won't say this, but I will. You might know she's running for governor. We're very proud of that here in Senate 8. One of her competitors, Ty Masterson on the Republican side, tweeted out this week on all of his social media a little graphic that said, "I stand with ICE." So when you're making your considerations for the governor's race, you might consider who's standing with Kansans and people's rights and who is standing with an outside federal agency that seems to be extremely poorly regulated at this time.
Good morning. Somebody already brought up Star Bond District. When you tweaking Star Bond District, was it you that said there was gonna be some tweaking? So is there an expectation that Overland Park, Leawood will end up in the Star Bond districts? And also, is there an expectation that the state will ask the cities in the Star Bond districts to sacrifice some of their tax collections for the project?
All right. Well, I will first say this is that I have been told that there will be a bill that will come through that has something to do with the recent stadium announcement. That is all I have been told. I have not been told what is in the bill. It's been hinted that the bill is coming through the Commerce Committee, which would make sense. We handle economic development. But also, we had a bill last session that tweaked star bonds that didn't make it through. So it could be that one. There could be a huge amendment that's ran onto it. I do not know. What I do know is that I have never seen star bonds districts that large before. That's not normal. And what I am doing now is I am waiting and I am combing through any information that I may receive to make sure that if there is a bill that comes through where the legislature has to make a decision to, further, I don't know, further tweak or further look at this particular Chiefs related project, I'm going to make darn sure that I am in line with the only people in this debate who matter, and those are the citizens of House 19. So I'm heading through cautiously. Let's just say that. And like off subject, I love the color of your sweater. So yeah, it's pretty, but also like not to, trivialize or butter you up. Sorry about that. That was not my intention. But I'm skeptical. I will say that.
Okay. Well, Linda, you're our representative where we live. I know the Royals are probably out of the question, but can we keep the talk about Royals alive so that we can stay out of that Star Bond district? Since we could potentially create our own, even though it's probably not going to happen.
I opposed the Star Bond bill from day one. I love the Royals more than I could possibly express to you. And I cannot do anything that would aid and abet them leaving Kauffman Stadium, which I also love as my second home. B, really more logical, is I could not ask my constituents to write a blank check. I know deals are done in secret. That's how business works. I don't object to that. That's how the world works. But I felt like this was way too much money. And I thought about this more and more. I believe in welfare for billionaires who could build their own stadium. But, they built a stadium for the Current with no problem. That was built with private funds on public land. So I don't know. I was listening to KCUR's Weekend Edition this morning, and they were talking about the stadiums a lot. And here is what I can report, which you've probably all seen in the media. Dan Hawkins has said December 31st was the deadline. We're not going to discuss the Royals anymore. That is an arbitrary deadline, which we've seen moved before. So I wouldn't rule anything in or out. The Northland has said we are done talking to the Royals. I'm very disappointed in my Royals. I think they've made a big mess of everything, and it can't be good for our baseball karma. And Chris Croft, the majority leader, whose district is just south of me, came out and said he will not support the Asperia campus location. So I think the window is shrinking at all times for, the Royals to move here. I would say personally, if they want to move to Oak Park Mall, I would love that. I could hear them from my backyard, but I know my neighbors will hate me for that. I would find it doubtful this district's going to get any bigger. We're all stunned by how big it is right now. So maybe Overland Park is safe? I don't know.
I guess what I would add is if the Royals are out of the picture, maybe then that district does get bigger, because if you take a look at, Missouri has double the population that we have in Kansas. If you're taking a look then at the fact that we are building potentially this new stadium, that makes the economic burden larger population-wise, if you think in those terms. So yes, there's still some tweaking to be done in terms of that Star Bond district. And, where I am in this process is, I just want to make sure there are more details out there, because it's my understanding too that, county commissioners didn't have a lot of information about what was going on. And keep in mind, and a lot of officials didn't. So keep in mind, this was a very small group doing the negotiating. And you're talking about people like Ty Masterson and Dan Hawkins. Some of those people that, maybe in the past or currently we still would say, they like to do bigger giveaways for corporations. So like I said, I really want to see the details, because ultimately, to Representative Clayton's point, my job is to make sure that I'm looking out for the taxpayer in terms of what this brings. I think we're all excited about the economic prospect, and I certainly don't want the Chiefs or Royals leaving the area. It's so important to some of our small businesses, but I also think there's got to be the right balance there in terms of, making sure it makes sense for the area. So like I said, I look forward to hearing more and more details as they're put out there. I think it's interesting too that, we saw the new mayor in KCK Krista Watson saying kind of essentially the same thing. Like, I need a little bit more information here in terms of figuring out how we move forward on this, because again, that was a pretty small group doing the negotiating process. So please keep in mind, we are all looking out for the taxpayers' interest, both short term and long term, and what the impact means to us.
I think my colleagues have covered this quite well, and I'm just going to say that the Aspiria campus is actually in the heart of my district, and I'm really proud of my constituents. So many of them were reaching out to me and thinking that I was a decision maker in this, and so, which, it was the Legislative Coordinating Council and the Commerce, right, that actually took the vote on this. But I did have a town hall on December 8th, specifically for my constituents so that I could address their questions and explain the process and who the decision makers were and give them the information they needed to make their voices heard. And I think it's very apparent that they did a very wonderful job of doing that. So shout out to my constituents for just being engaged and making their voices heard on that.
I'll try to say something nice. Our colleagues in Wyandotte County are very hopeful that the deals that are still to be made will help with their really desperate infrastructure problems up there. I think nobody is hoping that this whole Chiefs thing falls apart. Everybody is hoping for the best. And, I hope a lot of the naysayers that I hear from are wrong and that we'll get this paid off and we'll make all this money for the state. And then I'll stop because I said I'd say something nice.
So I think you guys kind of touched on this already, but so you said there are 7 people that negotiated this. So is it my understanding then that the legislature voted to give that group of 7 people the authority to decide who got taxed in this process?
Yes, essentially that is the way that it worked. So I am one of the people who, we had a special session in 2024 that was supposed to be, it was called for taxes. It ended up being all about this potential star bonds deal where the big talk was, the Chiefs and the Royals could move over to our side of the state line. Now, star bonds normally, I think our most successful star bond story would be the Legends and the Speedway, right? So you see that going quite well. You see some areas where it's not going as well as we would have preferred. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Eco Devo is often a gamble. But in this case, when we took those votes, and one of the reasons why I voted yes on that is that I was not born yesterday. I knew darn well when people were moving that bill through that it was right before an election and the push was to get Democrats to vote no, so then they could say Cindy Holscher hates the Chiefs and the Royals. So that was, that was by design. So we put that, we did take that vote. And yes, I trust or normally trust my leadership, even the ones on the other side of the aisle. I get a vote for minority leader as well on the House side. And I trust them to make good decisions and to be the ones to say no. But it was not only the Legislative Coordinating Council, which is just, again, the top members of the House and the Senate who were part of this decision-making process. It was also our governor and our Secretary of Commerce / Lieutenant Governor. So you have a lot of people in the room making this decision. But yes, by voting for that Star Bonds bill, I gave the power to my minority leader and my governor, who I trust. And they also made that decision. So it's an interesting lesson learned, right? You kind of walk back and I look back at my, 13 years in the legislature and I think, okay, what are some of the lessons that I've learned? I am the steward of my constituents' tax dollars. I should never, ever pass the buck to leadership again. And I don't think that I would make the same decision if given that same opportunity.
So is there any further process in the legislature that happens where they are accountable to you guys as the people who voted them the authority to do this?
Leadership elections in the future, yes. The governor obviously is term limited. And I'm sure that, we can have those discussions with them and be like, hey, man, as the full legislature, how do we walk this back? I'm sure we'll have some private discussions when it comes to that as more information is available. And again, I have not seen a bill yet, but it is my understanding that there will be some kind of a bill that the full legislature can vote on. And I imagine that everyone will be voting their districts. I also have to keep in mind, too, that I have some constituents that are like, you know what? I don't like the hunts. I don't like corporate welfare, but I also don't want the chiefs to move. And sometimes that's the way deals are made. I have heard constituents say that directly to me. So we have to understand and find out what they all think, what all sides are. But, bottom line, I do not find the Hunt family to be struggling financially. And this is not the same thing as Panasonic. Panasonic created really well-paying jobs. Panasonic is a company that has a number of stakeholders. It is over 100 years old. This is not an apples and oranges thing, because apples and oranges are fruit. It's a completely different situation here. So again, I have concerns. I have regrets. All I can do is move forward in the most constituent responsive way possible.
I was going to ask, you might remember, Stephanie, or maybe Mary-Lynn, you were there. When was it that there was an actual bill, wasn't there, that consolidated power with the LCC about, was that 4 or 5 years ago, when that shift was made?
Yeah, during COVID.
Yeah, so I got to stand. I don't know. I was trying to sit, but I'm better at standing. Yeah, I can't see people in the very back, and I want to be able to see you. So yeah, during COVID, there was this bill that was pushed forward because of this situation that, we weren't able to meet quite the way, we normally would function as a legislature. So this bill was pushed forward to consolidate power, essentially, is what it did within what's called the LCC, which brings it down to, those, few leadership positions that we have in the legislature. So what has happened then is, that has lingered on. And that's still part of the process now. And so instead of having the full legislature voting and vetting bills like you would hope, it's a very small group now that's in the room that's kind of working these things out. So like I said, this is kind of residual effect from COVID in terms of something that happened then, but it's still affecting us now in terms of a very small group making some pretty big decisions for the entire state.
And just to circle back to the meat of that question, when we voted on the Star Bond bill in the 24 special session, what we basically did in terms of who would be able to make the decisions about the taxes, that bill said that the state, that yes, we would allow the state to give up its incremental revenue on the Star Bond district, but for the municipalities and the and whoever else, like so Leawood and Overland Park and Olathe and so forth, they will be voting on whether to give theirs up or not. So our bill that we passed did not say that Olathe has to give up their taxes, that Overland Park has to. In fact, they have to have public discussions if they choose to give up the incremental, so the, on top of the existing that the economic development would bring to that area. So I think that is a major reason why the discussions around having the Royals at Hesperia came to an end, because the city of Leawood and the city councilors of Leawood said they would not support giving up their incremental sales tax increases. And so the power was not given away in that. When I voted yes on it, it was so that the state portion, yes, I voted for that, but the municipalities have their own power to participate in the Star Bond district or not.
Could we switch to education? Because
we?
I know you guys are all in education. Because I think that our funding for the schools runs out this year, and you have to negotiate new funding for the next 10 years, whatever period of time you negotiate that for. We have seen the legislature push vouchers, push tax credits so that they can pull money away from the schools. We've got 60 some odd counties that do not have school choice. Public schools are their only things. I'm particularly concerned that special ed funding does not continue to get funded as it should, which causes major budget problems for the local school districts. Your turn.
Thank you so much for that question. And I do serve on the K-12 budget committee, so I'll take it first, but everybody's going to have some thoughts on this. So there are really two parts of funding our public schools, and that would be the general education funding formula. Okay, and that is the one that has come out of the Gannon decision. That is the one that has been declared by the Kansas Supreme Court as constitutional. Okay, and so for the last 7 years, we've been under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and that formula has not changed. And when you have people saying, I worked with the governor to fully fund our schools, they're not being entirely truthful because we didn't have a choice. We were required to fund that formula as laid out, as was approved by the Supreme Court. So we have done that for the last 7 years. They every once in a while try to mess with that even, they just cannot be trusted with that. But the other part that's really important is our special education funding, and that is set in state statute. And that requires that we fund 92% of the excess cost of special education. And every child that has an IEP is required to have those services. We don't get to say, we like that IEP, that one's too much, we're not going to fund that one. They all have to be funded. And what is very harmful to our public schools is that the last time that the legislature followed the law and funded it at 92% was in 2011. So we have 14 years of underfunded special education. That doesn't mean that those children are not getting the services. What it means is that we are pulling funds from our general education funding to cover those costs. Those have to be paid first. And so right here in Johnson County, the deficit of special education funding is about $60 million. That's just our Johnson County schools. And what that equates to, the state base aid. So you have a body in a classroom, and that student is going to bring funding to your district of close to $6,000. That $60 million deficit in Johnson County reduces the amount available to a general education student by $1,400. So it's not $6,000, it's closer to $4,600. So that's something that people must understand across the board before we talk any further about education funding. So that formula actually expires in 2027, not in 2026. But just like businesses, our schools should understand what the funding is going to be. So in a perfect world or a reasonably perfect world, we would have a new formula in 2026 so that school districts can prepare for 2027. There has been a school finance committee that Representative Nikki McDonald from Olathe serves on, and they've been meeting for about a year or so, and I would be hard-pressed to tell you what direction they're going on that. So I will be watching that in 2026, and I think our voters and our constituents really need to pay attention to what we do in 2026 in preparation for 2027. And I would say that SPED and special education and general education are all on the docket and probably the chopping block. And you are correct that there are voucher pushes all the time that would redirect state general funding that should be available for education into private hands. I am really proud to tell you that in the 2025 session, for the first time since our tax credit scholarship, which is our voucher program in the state of Kansas, we were able to kill the constant annual push to increase the eligibility, increase the cap. Basically, they are pushing towards making that the universal voucher program. And for what it's worth, the state of Oklahoma just passed vouchers a year or two ago, and their accounting of it just came out. And I will tell you that the majority of those folks who got those vouchers were already in private schools, 91%. $48 million of taxpayer money went to families making over $250,000 a year in the state of Oklahoma. So, yes, yes. I have my family farm is from Oklahoma. My sister's a special education teacher there. So 48 million went to families making over $250,000 a year, whose kids were already in private school.
200. Okay. Sorry.
Yep.
Me.
Yep.
I don't approve.
Don't, right. And so on that note, I will hand the microphone over and we'll take more questions about that. But I think that's a pretty good overview of where we're going with that. But we did kill that bill. It'll be back, don't you worry. But for the first time, we killed an expansion in the House in 2025.
Good morning. I have a specific question.
Can let Representative Featherston.
I think the things I would throw in is that regular education was only funded fully because there was a lawsuit. Lawsuit costs you money, but it was a terrible tax plan that bankrupted the state that led to our schools not being fully funded for, I think, 8 years. And a lawsuit is what solved that problem. Currently, the state has been released from that lawsuit, so good luck. Special ed was not part of that because it was fully funded at the time. So, so that's how we've ended up on 2 separate tracks. I don't think that's a wise idea. And people will tell you the special ed money like that is mandated. That is mandated that we pay that. Well, the state doesn't. So when you hear other discussions about maybe reducing the mill levy that supports our public schools and we will mandate the state will fill that back in, you might just look at the track record of the state of things that we are required to do, funding education, that not me, and we were not part of this underfunding. But the legislature has a very poor track record, and I wouldn't trust the legislature further than I could throw any one of us when it comes to funding schools.
I would also mention, sometimes I'll get this question from people and they'll say, if you had one wish for something in the legislature, what would it be? That's hard to come down to one wish, but often my answer is this. I wish we had a session where we didn't have to fight so damn hard just to get basic funding for our schools. Because every year it's the same thing. And there's a small group of us trying to get our schools funded, and we are outnumbered by a group of people who are really pushing hard for vouchers and defunding of our schools. And lots of times people will ask me, well, why is that? Why are there so many people against funding of our schools? And I'll give you a little bit of data. I think this is from 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. If you looked at the makeup of the Senate, 40 members. At that point, only 6 of us, I believe it was, 6 or 7 of us, had children who had attended public school within the past 10 years. So you have a whole group of decision makers who have no connection to public schools. The other members at that point were either homeschooling, private schooling, or they were of an age that, they hadn't been in a public school building in maybe a couple decades. So again, you have a large group of legislators making decisions about public schools with really no connection to it whatsoever. There's, like I said, it's a small group of us pushing back against that. We do our very best to try to help people understand and help our peers understand the load that's being put on our teachers, the number of problems that they are expected to deal with and educate our kids to certain standards. But again, like I said, it's a tough fight when you have a number of people who just haven't even been in a public school building. The thing you're going to hear going forward from the voucher movement and people against funding our schools is they're going to say, we're spending more money now than we ever have.
On everything, it's called inflation.
Yes. Well, yes. And there's inflation, but also keep in mind, like at the time when I came into the legislature in 2017, we were at the height of the Brownback experiment. Everything was being slashed. I mean, we were at minimal investment in some of these functions, including education. We had nowhere really to go but up from there. So of course we're spending more. That doesn't mean that we're spending the right amount. We're just kind of at the bottom level of adequate in terms of general ed. And to the point brought up earlier, we're not fully funding special ed. So that's kind of what the legislature's been using as their way out of this. Yeah, we'll go ahead and fund general education, but we're not going to fund special education the way we're supposed to. And that hurts all students because we're mandated to make sure that the funding is provided there. And, to the point of vouchers, again, small group of us who have been pushing back against that, to the point Mary-Lynn was making, 7 out of 10 vouchers go to folks whose kids were already in private school making over 6 figures. That's not the story we were told. You know, a number of us didn't believe it, of course, but when vouchers started being pushed, we were told, well, this is to help kids in poor neighborhoods where their schools are struggling. That's not who this goes to. Again, 7 out of 10 go to folks whose kids were already in private schools making over 6 figures.
I wouldn't even know what to do with 250. I cannot get my head, but that's Oklahoma, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
We're in a different, yes, we're in a different economic strata here. So working as legislators. But I will tell you this, of that group, the 3 out of 10 that were kids that were in public school that transferred to private school, tried the voucher for a while, guess what happens? Over half of them end up going back to the public school. Because why? Because that private school isn't able to provide the services they need, such as special education. Or maybe they raise the rates at the private school. Or guess what? Private school can kick your kid out at any point they want. Public school can't do that. So that's why we fight so hard. And I will tell you, as a product of a public school, I mean, that was my ticket out of poverty. I am going to fight every single day to make sure every child out there has access to public education. So I'm going to again thank you in advance because we're going to need you again this session. Stopping these voucher bills is hard. A lot of that network that I have out there that has helped push back on the redistricting, we're going to need that network again pushing back on vouchers because they'll come at us again. There's 2 sayings about Topeka. Bad bills never die, so you can count on it coming back, and things can always get worse. And that's why we got to make sure everybody gets out and votes and makes good decisions this fall. So enough of my rant on vouchers. But I will tell you this, in the end, vouchers are a transfer of wealth. That's all it is. It's just another way that lobbyists have put together a plan that takes money from taxpayers, you know, us right here in the room, and moves it again to wealthier folks. It's the same thing we're seeing on the federal level. It's the same thing we're seeing with a lot of the policies that Trump is pushing. It's a transfer of wealth, and I'm going to do everything I can continually to stop it, and so are these folks.
So thank
Applaud. Go ahead. It's been very quiet here this morning.
Thank you for your response and advocacy for children who need special education as well as appropriate general education services. As a professional who works with children who have special needs, I am honestly appalled at the lack of resources that are available. That said, I applaud the teachers and staff who are doing their very best with the resources that they have. I've seen some amazing things happen with very little resource support. I have 2 questions. One is, why is the legislature allowed not to have the 92% funding every year? My second question is, as constituents, what steps would you recommend that we do to hold the legislature accountable for this mandated full funding?
Vote. Don't look at people's voting records. When they say, I worked with Governor Kelly to fully fund schools, did they also work to pass vouchers? Voting is what we can do. Yes, reach out to your representative. Reach out to people on the education committee. Don't send a form letter, or at least take the form letter and zhuzh it up with your own thoughts. But we have got to stem this tide in November, or it's going to get worse. I can't even imagine the horrors if we maintain the Republican super duper majority of far right extremists. I'm not talking about regular Republicans, okay? I'm talking about the super far right. And then we get a super far right Republican governor in office. I assume it will be as bad as the Brownback administration, which was so bad, I flipped parties to vote for a moderate Republican to get us a better representative here in House District 16. It will be as bad as when Brownback was in charge, slashing of all the social services, slashing of education. And I think it will be worse. So I think you have to put the pressure and let your legislators know you are watching. It's great to bolster those of us who do support, so we have the data to say, like, look, all of my constituents contacted me. Nobody liked this nonsense. But we have to vote, and every reasonable person, you have got to get to the polls and make sure they know what's going on. I mean, this is a lot of money that Johnson County is losing, and we need that money. Our kids need that money. I'm sure they need more money than that. You see all over the place where our special ed paras work a full-time job, and then they go and work another full-time job after school. That is wrong, and we have to do something about it.
I want to thank you so much for the work you do. And you are right. There are fabulous things happening in our special education. It's one of the reasons why the population of special ed students is rising, because people come to Johnson County because they know that their children will get outstanding education and services. So first of all, thank you so much for that. And that does bring me to another very, very important thing that will be coming up on the ballot in August. And you asked, why is the legislature allowed to do that? So as Representative Featherston mentioned, the reason that the schools are actually fully funded is because of lawsuits about it. And then the Kansas Supreme Court retained jurisdiction over that lawsuit. So they did that because the legislature had proven over and over and over again that they would not fully fund our schools and be constitutional. So they kept jurisdiction just until last year, meaning that if the legislature took a wrong turn on funding, they would be back in court over that. We don't have a lawsuit about special education, and it's very expensive to do so. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the Republican supermajority has put a constitutional amendment on the ballot in August of 2026 that would take away our merit-based system for Supreme Court justice selection and turn it over to an election process. And we saw in Wisconsin that that is not a good way to do things. In fact, the model that we have is called the Missouri model, surprisingly, and it is merit-based, and no state that has ever adopted that model has moved away from it. And so that, I think that's very telling. And why would they put that on the ballot? They are putting it on the ballot because they don't like to be told that they have to fully fund schools. They don't like to be told that women have a right to determine their health care. And they've been told those two things very specifically within the last decade or so. So we are going to need your help to fight that constitutional amendment. Just remember to vote no, right? Just vote no, folks. But that is, I think, the best the legislature can do it, and they put that on the ballot in August of 26 to make sure they don't get told to be constitutional on other things moving forward.
We're good at voting no in August, though, so just do it again, we'll be fine.
And that's exactly what I tell people. If you showed up and voted no in August of 2022, you got to come back and do it again. Because, well, and the thing is, I know it's kind of hard to connect the dots maybe in terms of what this amendment really is about. But that's what we're talking about. The GOP has not gotten their way in terms of defunding our schools. So they need to go this way through the amendment to change how our justices are selected. They haven't gotten their way in terms of taking away access to reproductive health care. Changing the courts is their way, their other path to try to do that. So that's exactly what this is about. So like I said, while it might be kind of hard to connect those dots, just remember and tell your friends, if you voted no in August of 2022, you got to come back and do it again. I do want to say also thank you for the incredible job that's being done in our schools. I often tell people our teachers in our schools are doing excellent jobs in spite of the legislature. Because it isn't just the funding issue. I mean, every year there's this barrage of bills attacking teachers and the jobs they do and paras and the curriculum. So it's coming from all angles. And like I said, I mean, our schools have been, the standard of highest success, despite the fact that there's this constant attack on them. So like I said, I'm always very thankful for the job that teachers do. A couple of years ago after COVID, we lost a lot of teachers and we still have this teacher shortage. So I was seeing teachers covering 2 and 3 classes. And that bothered me because part of the reason why we've been in this situation is because the legislature has not properly addressed funding and making sure we're recruiting and retaining teachers. So I went out and got my sub license. I know you've gotten your sub license too. Well, I'm going to fight hard in the legislature to try to make sure that funding is available. I'm going to do everything I can in our communities to try to make a difference too. And again, I just couldn't stand to see some of my friends who are teachers covering 2 and 3 classes. And I would tell you, I think it does help too to be able to say, what I am seeing in our schools and the successes and how hard our staff are working. Because every day, the voucher movement and the movement that doesn't care for our schools, they have lobbyists in Topeka every day. And they are whispering in the ears of legislators that your schools are failing, that your teachers are indoctrinating. They're going in boys and coming out girls. Don't know how the hell that's going to happen in a day, but that's the type of thing that these lobbyists are pushing.
Surgery over the new now.
Yes, I guess. But again, there are lobbyists there for the voucher movement telling teachers those stories. So we have to push back as hard as we can because, teachers are busy working in schools during the day while the lobbyists are there spreading this misinformation. I would tell you too, when you look at voting records, Linda mentioned this earlier. That is so important because so many people out there have no idea about the voting records of legislators. Any candidate can show up on your doorstep or in a form and say, I support our schools. That doesn't tell you how they're voting in Topeka, though. And that's the key. And I've seen it so many times where some of my peers say that exact thing. Well, I support our public schools. But then they go to Topeka and they vote for voucher programs that defund them. So you absolutely have to watch how they're voting and hold people accountable. And that's what I tell people. You got to find 5 friends to get to the polls this fall. Not people right here. You all are probably already going to get out and vote. And you all are probably very much engaged to know the issues. I need you to find the 5 people out there who aren't consistent voters. Some of your neighbors, some of your friends. And here's the fact of the matter. We have people working 2 and 3 jobs. They aren't able to keep up with everything going on. Some of them may not even know when the election is coming. So sometimes it's just as simple as saying, hey, I need you to get out and vote for this candidate or vote no on this amendment. And because there's an election coming up, guess what? You're already an expert to them. So like I said, that's my challenge to you going forward. I need you to find 5 friends that you get out there to vote in the primary as well as the general, because we have to turn this around. To Linda's point, I am fearful, absolutely fearful of what a Republican in the governor's office would mean to this state. I've seen their agenda. You will see something worse than the Brownback experiment. You will likely see the loss of our public schools. You will likely see the loss of voting rights. Those are the things they've been pushing. So not that I like to scare people, but absolutely. These are very, very concerning times. So again, I challenge you, find those 5 friends. Be an overachiever, find 10 or 15 and get them to the polls this fall.
Sign up to be a precinct leader.
Oh, yes. My friend Denise mentioned sign up to be a precinct leader if you really want to get involved. Yeah, you make a difference that way. Oh, Melissa.
I hope they're, and I see
There's somebody out
another
there.
lady with her hand up potentially.
There's somebody out there crying because they are so worried about what's going to happen if, if elections don't go right this fall. So.
So for some reason this week, Dwayne Gosen crossed my mind. You remember The Economist during the Brownback years, and he would say that the actions taken in the Brownback plan could have effects that lasted for decades. I think he said even 40 years. So are we still seeing effects of that? And could that be part of the storytelling why we need a moderate governor?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes. So when I first took office, this would have been my first session was in 2013. The Brownback tax plan was voted on in 2012. We repealed it in 17, but the real fiscal effects, we didn't start seeing the budgetary benefits until around 18 or 19. So you still have some jobs, especially full-time equivalent positions that were cut. And one of the problems is that you hear a lot of people demonize public employees, right? They're a drain on the system, they're a drain on your tax dollars. But these are individuals that have institutional knowledge. So in fact, like the word bureaucrat has been kind of a bad word ever since, like the 40s, right? So it was an anti-New Deal slur. But when you have in any corporation, you want someone who is the expert, who understands the ins and outs of everything, who understands how to go and find the money, who knows how to get those grants to bring extra money into the department, who knows how to squeeze every single bit out of every single taxpayer's dime. When you cut those people and then you hire inexperienced people at less, and you're unable to, with the way that we fund or do not fund, I might say, our pension program, Capers 3, if anyone is on that, it's a joke. It's like having basically nothing. It is very difficult to recruit quality employees to do that behind the scenes work of the government. So that is what I have noticed the most is you see, and you also see adverse effects, frankly, on the local economy of Topeka. Topeka used to be a place where you could have a comfortable sort of middle class life, just raising a family on, a $40,000 or $50,000 a year salary, government salary. And then when it came to cutting minigers, which is completely, a different situation, and all of the cuts that the Brownback administration has made, you see the local economy of Topeka going downhill. And so that is one of the biggest things that I see is that brain drain, the fact that we cut the experts out of running government, and now the only thing that we can afford is people who will work for very low wages with almost no pension. And that's no denigration on our current public employees, but it's very difficult to recruit good teachers as well. Because as much as we talk about, oh, you'll be fulfilled by doing this work. Yes, emotionally fulfilling work is incredibly important, but you know what? Money talks. And the way that we pay respect to our public workers is by paying them a living wage where they can raise a family and by putting a decent pension system in place so that they can retire comfortably. We are committing mass disrespect to government workers and have been doing. And so that is the worst part, the sad legacy of the Brownback plan. And as much as we tried to fix things by repealing it, and we don't have that major drain, that's what we're seeing in the long term. That's the tragedy of it.
I would mention to you, 2017, when we ended the Brownback experiment, a couple of things I want you to remember about that. That was my first term. And, we were sent there, a number of us as new legislators, because we were in such a horrible situation under the Brownback experiment. And I remember it. I mean, my kids were in school. We were losing teachers left and right. We didn't have supplies. We didn't have lunch ladies. Some of our classrooms had shower curtains for doors. I mean, it was a crazy situation. That
be open on Fridays.
Yes, and that's what prompted me to run, because I was seeing what was going on in our schools. So we get there, and as sometimes you see happens, leadership people, they got stuck, I guess is the best way to put it, and couldn't come to a consensus or get a remedy for what to do about this Brownback experiment. At that point, that's when I reached out to Stephanie and said, you know what? I think we should start a women's caucus. And she was a Republican at that time. I said, why don't we start this? Because it looks like, leadership, both sides of the aisle have backed into their corners and things just weren't happening. And that's a dangerous time when people aren't collaborating or even trying to solve the problem. So we decided to form a women's caucus.
Yeah, and then the Senate took credit for it.
I was in the House then.
I will never forget them.
But it started in the House, small group of people. We met secretly. because there's a lot of eyes and ears in the Capitol, and they sometimes try to, try to mess things up for you as you're trying to work on these issues. But we met secretly, and then, every week we grew the group a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger. And that is how, bringing people on, going through the process of collaboration and digging in and doing that work, that is how we crafted the bill that ended the Brownback experiment. And please keep in mind, some of these candidates who are running on the GOP side, despite the fact that we had economists and people saying, this is not working, the state is going bankrupt, a number of those individuals who are running on the GOP side for governor voted to keep it going. I mean, I want you to think about that. We were in a horrible situation. We had brought the solution forward and it passed. We got the numbers on board to override Governor Brownback's veto, but there were still some people who voted the opposite direction, said, no, this is a good idea. We should keep this going, when everybody pretty much in the world knew it wasn't. And the legacy is, yes, that underpayment of our workers. And while we've worked so hard to try to build back our agencies, to get better funding for our schools, the best way I can explain it to you is it's like this horrible tornado hit the state government and nearly wiped everything out. And we're trying to rebuild it. But at the same time, there's another tornado that's hitting us. Do you know how hard it is to rebuild a house that's been devastated from a tornado while there's another tornado going on? I mean, that's what it feels like.
Kansas.
And that's why it is so absolutely important, again, that we get people out to vote this fall, because I would say there's probably every House seat will be on the ballot, 125 of them. There's probably 4 or 5 of them anyway that we can flip. We got to do that because this situation is unsustainable that we're in. For the health of our state, for the future of our people, like I said, we got to make sure we're getting people out and vote and starting to go a different direction. And we can do that. I'm confident we can.
Sure. If someone asked me, I'm sorry. If someone asked me what Ty Masterson's or the Republicans' end game was as far as education and vouchers, what would be a clear, accurate response I could give them? Or anyone could give them. It's not like people are thronging around me asking me, but I do talk about these things. I think it'd be helpful for everyone if we could define what the end game is, because it looks scary to me.
Well, to me, I was in denial about this for quite some time, I might add, because you don't want the hyperbole, the things that you think at 3 a.m. to be true. You don't want those 3 a.m. thoughts about government to be real. But I will say this, I have seen a marked and systemic move where there is a dismantling of a universal equal opportunity in education for everyone, regardless of whether they come from a stable, safe, wealthy 2-parent household, whether they're foster children, whether they have special needs, what their zip code is, what their family situation is. And instead, we're seeing this bizarre push to siphon money away from equal education opportunity, and then under the guise of caring. How often do we hear college isn't for everyone? And here's the thing is that I am a strong supporter of the trades. I would not exist if it were not for my great-grandfather who was a union carpenter or my grandfather who was a union electrician. That is good, honest work. But here's the thing, they grew up in education systems that did not have equal opportunity. And every time I hear someone say college isn't for everyone, you can bet they are not enrolling their daughter in trade school. That college is for my kids, but not your kids. That's a push that is concerning to me. I am also just, again, seeing this push when it comes to vouchers. It's a reverse Robin Hood sort of situation where people are robbing from the base, right? Those of the people that are in the lower or middle class tax tiers. and giving to the wealthy. People who make $250,000 a year, that's like 5 times what I, as a single parent, make, do not deserve money to send their kids to private schools. It is, God, I sound like a conservative when I say this taxation is theft thing, but but it is interesting. Again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. The way that you can tell the morality of a legislator is by the tax policy that they support. And who is paying for all of this, and where is that money going? You think about this in this age of where we're really struggling with affordability, when you can't go grocery shopping without having a minor heart attack, or at least I can't. I've got a teenage boy though, so bear with me on that. But thinking about that's one of the main issues that I see, is this desire to create this two-tiered class system where you have some people that win and then everyone else that loses, and we're paying for them to that's not fair. We're not doing that, or at least I'm not doing that. But yeah, that is what I see as the end game, going after education. And to add insult to injury, they're telling teachers that, oh, we're your friends, we're going to get cell phones out of classrooms, guys. I want you to read SB 302. That is the bell-to-bell cell phone ban. That is designed to say, oh, we care about teachers, we want to make it easier. You will note that there is no money appropriated to enforce that bill. All it does is create extra work for teachers or administrators. Who's going to frisk these kids when they walk in? Even talking to teenagers, actually a particularly brilliant young lady, your granddaughter actually, told me, she's a 14-year-old freshman at Shawnee Mission East, and she said, well, hey, can't kids just bring in an old cell phone that they don't use anymore and hand to the people and then carry the phone with them? Here's the thing is that Cora's a smart kid. I mean, she's amazing, but you have to keep in mind that if you see legislation that says we're helping teachers, we're all very capable people. Read the legislation and then think, how is this going to be implemented? How does it actually help? Because there's nothing that makes me angrier than when some politician tries to snow the people by telling them one thing about legislation when it actually does another. So I'm sorry, I'm mad. But we're about ready to head into session. So I should be fired up and ready to fight for you and ready to see through a lot of the baloney. Because it's certainly being fed to you all. And I think you deserve steak, not baloney. I want the best.
I will mention there's really in this anti-education, anti-public school movement kind of 2 factions. One of them is a religious faction, and their desire is that all children are getting religious education.
Christian religious education.
Yes, and the emphasis is on Christian. So like I said, you have that faction that's making the push on the vouchers. The other faction that you have making the push is that group that just basically doesn't want to fund anything for other people. And what I'm saying to you is they want their things funded, but maybe because their kids went to private school or homeschool, or, they're of a certain age, or maybe they don't have kids, you have that faction who's like, well, I'm not using public schools, I shouldn't have to pay into it. Which totally is backwards from, hopefully the covenant we have with our communities, to try to help one another and to try to make sure everybody gets an adequate education. But like I said, those are the 2 factions that I see that are driving the whole push. The religious group who wants religious education, primarily Christian for everybody, and then the faction that just basically says, not using it, I shouldn't have to pay for it, but you better pay for my stuff. The other thing I will tell you is that, yeah, I absolutely see the push as a 2-tier system, where you have a group of people who have access, the wealthier folks who have access to solid education, and then the rest are essentially left behind. What I will tell you is in other states where they have passed these voucher plans, the ones that have been pushed here in our state, here's what happens. These voucher plans go through, you see a ton of money taken away from the public schools, go to private entities or homeschools, which these vouchers aren't regulated, keep in mind. A person could say that they're setting up a great school and they could be teaching something totally off the wall, not actually adhering to any type of curriculum. So you see this money transferred out of the public school, again, to potentially private school or other entities. And then what happens typically in those states that have implemented these plans? Within a couple years, they will typically pass a bill to roll back protections on child labor. Now, I want you to think about that. Why would we see those bills coming forward in terms of rolling back protections on child labor? I want you to think about that. If you're a parent and you have kids and you can't afford that school that gives a quality education and you're struggling, this allows you to send your kids to work in the meatpacking plant at an earlier age. Send the kids to places that we typically do not, and in history have said, we don't want children working in these factories. But that's the reality of what the push is. And that does illustrate, again, that push towards a two-tier system. That's why these voucher plans are so dangerous, not just because of what they do to our schools and defunding, but that next step. And I will tell you, that next step, that is not what I had in mind for Kansas. That is not what I had in mind for this country. So again, if I've said it, how many times have I said it? Find 5 friends, 10 friends, make sure you get out and vote this year, because that's exactly what's on the line and what we're looking at.
I think we can do one last question, and then I think some of us will have time to hang around. If you want to sign up for a newsletter, we all have one. But we'll give the last question to Alice. Is that? Thank you so much. Can you hear me? No. Sorry. Now?
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. It's very frustrating, last session in particular, that the hearings for bills are not publicized. And also, the testimony is not accepted until like 24 hours ahead of time. And that's a real problem for people who are trying to follow what's going on. And then you add on top of that the layer of the gut and go, where they have a bill that you think, oh, I'm supposed to tell them to vote for Bill 2018, and then all of a sudden they flip it totally to the opposite of what was originally wanted in 2018. So my question is, how can we be on top of this when we're not legislatures, we're just trying to live our lives? How can we be able to respond? And I can't tell you how many Super Bowl weekends I'm sitting there writing testimony just before the Super Bowl goes on, because that's when they say Monday is when we're going to have this meeting on it, when nobody's paying attention.
All right. Well, as a longstanding advocate for transparency, I will say this. Strategically, one of the best things that you can do as advocates and activists, and frankly, citizens and stewards of your own taxpayer money, is when you reach out to legislators, don't reach out with a bill number, right? Reach out with a subject matter and say, I oppose vouchers. I oppose this type of tax structure. So keep it personal and keep it subject matter based. Because now I will say this, as vice chair of the Rules Committee, although a lot of people don't like the gut and go, where it's a procedural move where a bill has its contents removed and then contents that is only slightly germane to the underlying bill inserted into that bill. A lot of people hate the gut and go, but the gut and go is how we've gotten Medicaid expansion through the House. It is a strategic move that is often used by those who lack power. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I wouldn't remove, I wouldn't change the way that the chessboard moves, because then otherwise that takes away even the slightest bit of strategy for people who aren't in leadership. Otherwise, they end up locking it up. But I will say this, is that as advocates, I know that it seems like you aren't able to really get a lot of things through. And that is by design. By design, it's meant to make you lose hope in situations, and we're not doing that. That's not a 2026 thing that we're doing. What we are going to do is we are going to continue to push. I know you're tired. I know it's frustrating. I also recommend, as far as testimony is concerned, go ahead and pre-write some testimony now. again, subject matter based, have a based letter. And when I talk about testimony, not everyone's submitted testimony before, but basically it's a letter to the committee. It's dear chair, vice chair, and committee members. My name is Stephanie Clayton, and I support this issue because of this. So then you can go ahead and insert bill numbers in there, and you don't even necessarily have to have that to submit testimony, at least not in the body. Just have it in the subject line. So, have something pre-formed that you can just plug in as things change. I would also recommend staying in touch. Not everyone can afford to have a lobbyist there to follow, but guess what? Usually lobbyist is a dirty word, but not always. You have people who are, for instance, lobbyists for the American Civil Liberties Union. So if you're down with civil liberties, as I suspect most Americans are, follow them. They do have paid boots on the ground. So for those of you that are like, I'm too busy literally earning money and trying to support my family to follow all of this, understand that you do have trusted individuals in there following things. Talk to your representatives. Talk to our assistants. Although I had the best assistant in the world, Travis, who was incredibly helpful to a lot of you all. We lost him to a brief illness this summer. So it used to be that all you'd have to do is send your testimony to Travis and he would print it and get it to the right place. You have, however, other staff members in that building who are absolute gems, who understand that boots on the ground and who can really push things through. You've got the voter network, who they don't necessarily follow policy. They're more of an advocacy group when it comes to elections and things like that. But you do have that. There are many teammates of yours that can help you through this. Understand, too, this will probably be the toughest, most quickly moving session that we have ever seen. 2025 was very quick. We have a lot of people running for statewide office. No offense, Cindy. And but our Speaker of the House is running for statewide office. Insurance commissioner, he didn't really raise a lot of money, so he's going to want to get us out of there quickly because you can't fundraise during session. Our Senate president is running for governor. We have plenty of people in both chambers that want to cut off session early and get us out of there. And so you are going to see breakneck speed. Now, strangely, this is good news in some ways because it takes time to, with more controversial bills, to threaten and cajole legislators into getting things through or to stopping things. And so I have heard that we will be done, like sine die, finished with session by April 1st, which is unprecedented. So it's about, 12 weeks? If you take away the fact that we don't really do a lot during weeks 7 or 8 due to the turnaround break, then it's going to be shorter. So sometimes short is brutal for advocates, but sometimes it's good because honestly, the less time the legislature is in session, the less time they have to enact policies that hurt you as honest, decent taxpayers.
I know the whole world seems like it's on fire and you're trying to live your life and you don't have time to live our life. Find your advocacy group. They will do the work for you. Representative Clayton mentioned it ever. We have League of Women Voters if voting is your jam. Moms Demand Action if gun safety in general, is your jam. Mainstream is nonpartisan. They're very clear about what they represent down the middle issues. NEA, National Education Association, will keep you up to date. These people are paid or are amazing volunteers to be in Topeka, and they watch what legislation is coming up. And yes, some of it will be announced on very short notice, even though we have rules about, I've showed up to committee and heard, we're going to have a bill, and it hasn't been announced what it is at all. The rules seem to be arbitrary in Topeka, which seems very ironic for people who make the rules. So, find your issue. You don't have to do everything, but find your issue that you can latch onto and just do what you can. It's very tricky, troubling time right now, and we have to band together to do what we can to help ourselves, our families, and our neighbors. So the burden is not on you to do everything. Is my real just think what one thing could you do?
So, anybody else?
I can hang out.
I'm so glad Linda mentioned that because I know a lot of people are like, there's so many things going on. I don't know what to do. It's overwhelming. And that's the same thing I tell them is find that group, pick one, maybe pick two, but pick that group that you want to align with to fight in regard to that particular issue. Because here's what I will tell you, whether you're fighting for Medicaid expansion or you're fighting for common sense gun rights or you're fighting for school funding, in the end, we're all fighting really the same group, the extremists who are on the other side of the people in terms of those issues. So line up with one of those groups and join that fight. I will tell you, I'm on that coach committee, like I mentioned earlier. One thing I've consistently brought up has been the fact that, hey, how about if we do a bill that streamlines the process for testimony to be submitted? Because every committee sets up different rules to make it difficult, to make it complicated, to make it burdensome. But, my vision is you should be able to just go on the website, click a button to submit testimony, and there's the process for you. We should have those capabilities. The other thing I will mention to you, as was said earlier, yeah, just get that testimony ready. We know what bad bills are coming. Again, every bad bill that hasn't passed last session or the session before, you'll probably see some of those coming back. Just get that testimony raised so that when you get the word that the bill is coming forward the next day, you can send that testimony off. And I will tell you, every year, if you're not following me on social media, I typically put alerts out there on some of these hearings that come up spur of the moment, so you can get that testimony in. And we will work with our office assistants to try to find ways for you to be able to get the copies that you might need, et cetera, or to get it to the right place. And additionally, Hope was mentioned. I know it feels horrible right now. And that's very justifiable, of course, with everything that's going on. But I'm going to share this with you. I've done over 60 town halls across the state in the past few months. Now, every year after session, I usually go out in different parts of Kansas and do 8 or 10 of them because there's a lot of areas where the elected officials won't show up to do a town hall. So I've always kind of gone and filled in the gap. Like I said, normally it's been 8 or 10 of them. This year, though, the demand was off the charts, and I ended up doing 60 of them. Because people want answers. People want to be heard. They are so uncomfortable with the things going on. And here's the most encouraging part. We've had record numbers of people showing up to these town halls. And it's been a mix of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And what I'm seeing there is you've got a group of people that are feeling very dissatisfied with the way they may have voted last time around. It's not a huge group, but it's a decent group. But the bigger group that I'm seeing that's showing up that is so hopeful are the people who just haven't consistently been engaged. And they're being hit hard in the pocketbook. And now they are saying, okay, I can't just vote maybe every 4 or 6 years when there's something on the ballot that's very interesting to me, or when there's somebody I know that's on the ballot. They now see they have to get out every single election cycle and vote, or this is what we have happening, what we're seeing right now. So like I said, I want to share that with you because I think it's so important that you know that there are people out there getting engaged, getting involved, who we're going to make sure get to the polls this fall and make a difference in our elections. Okay, all right, yeah, so we have to go. So please stick around if you have questions. I think one of you back there in the white had your hand up earlier, or maybe we missed you, or...
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was second, like I'm terrified of having a Republican governor next. And if it's Ty Masterson and you, and he's pretty far right.
Right.
He aligns with this current administration, and they are usually willing to do anything to win. And so I think I speak for me and my friends here, like, are you willing to fight fire with fire? Like, an example would be Governor Newsom with Trump, just like social media, like, love it. Being necessary. Besides guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question because I'm with you. I'm absolutely terrified of what Kansas will look like if Ty Masterson or one of the other extremists ends up in office. So let me give you the data. I'm the only person in the race that actually has won elections as a Democrat in red areas. That's very important. You know, you can't show up with a knife to a gunfight, and I know that. But every election I have won has been in a red district. I know the strategy that it takes to win in those areas. So yeah, I will show up and I will push back. And I will tell you, I'm not afraid of Ty Masterson because that's the type of person I've beat 4 times. So again, I'm not afraid to bring that strategy. I'm not afraid to hold him accountable because every election is what it has taken to make sure we defeat them. And additionally, I believe I'm the only Democrat in the legislature currently that not only wins in red districts, but has actually defeated Republican incumbents.
Oh, God, I forgot about Gross Road.
Yeah, do you remember Amanda Gross Road and Jim Denning?
I'm trying to forget.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of therapy, though.
But keep in mind, I'm the only person in this race that has done that. That's the toughest type of an election to be in as a Democrat, defeating somebody in a red district and taking out an incumbent. That's the skill set I bring. So like I said, I'm not afraid of this. I am full speed ahead and ready to make sure that Ty Masterson does not win this race. And I hope you will sign up because we're going to get a lot of help. So we can do this, though. So I appreciate the question. Let's get it done. Thank you all.